so much harder for us to communicate disappointment to our friends than it is to our lovers.
Oh, well, we're not conditioned for it. I mean, especially women, we're conditioned to not rock the boat, to get along. And it really goes against our training to 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 be seen as disruptive or to be seen as critical. I think we're more concerned about our friends' feelings than our discomfort.
Which is ironic because we're supposed to
Uh,
see our friendships and we always talk about our friendships as a safe place, right? So then why wouldn't we expect them to be supportive if we say, "Hey, I'm disappointed you canceled the last 3 times," or "I'm disappointed I don't get phone time with you anymore since you have the kids," or "I'm disappointed whatever."
I think that the stakes are so high in friendships where we feel if we aren't perfectly supportive, our friend is just going to distance us. And I think that's part of the insecurity around modern friendships is like, you know that your friend could just cut you out.
Studies say that we lose half our friendships every 7 years. Does that statistic make you wonder who you will move on from or who's going to dump you? Friendship is complicated, as detailed in the book Modern Friendship: How to Nurture Our Most Valued Connections by Anna Goldfarb. Anna is a journalist, author, and speaker better known as the New York Times friendship correspondent. On today's podcast, we look at why it's so hard to communicate disappointment to our friends, how mourning the loss of a friendship is different from mourning a romantic relationship, and why being considered somebody's best friend is so much more valuable than having one. Anna says we must renegotiate our friendship as life changes their shape, rather than thinking it will all work out magically. The connective tissue of long term friendships used to be shared community or region, but most modern friendships no longer work that way. So, in each friendship, Anna explains that there has to be a why. Unless you think that new friends come easily enough, keep in mind that it takes about 200 hours to build a new best friendship. Do you really think you have that kind of time?
What changed for me was I wrote an article for the New York Times about people pleasing. It was during COVID and like lockdowns and things were starting to open up, but some things weren't. And I wanted to explore the pressure you feel of friends and loved ones saying, come out to my party when you're not comfortable yet, but you feel compelled to say yes, even though you're not comfortable yet. And I learned a lot about people pleasing. And one of the biggest impacts of people pleasing is that it's lying. It's essentially lying to someone. When you're agreeing to do things that you don't want to do, that's lying. And don't want to we don't want to lie to our friends because that lying is one of the top 3 friendship killers. Aside from not showing up when needed and disclosing a secret. So that was a reframe for me of, okay, I can just say, yeah, I can just go along to get along, but I don't want to lie to my friends. So that gave me permission to be more authentic. I made it into an authenticity issue. I got to just be authentic with my thoughts and feelings and availability with my friends.
So it's so you're saying that when we give more than we have to give and we don't communicate that it makes us uncomfortable, we're lying to our friends and we're giving them
Mhm.
almost a false sense of security. So then
Yes.
so then that's not a real friendship. It's not really what we want to believe we have in our friendships.
And where that comes in with these conversations about disappointment, like I really hope to hedge off those things so it doesn't get that far. When
Mhm.
you live authentically, and it's like, well, here's my budget, here's what I can afford. The goal is to hedge off those bigger problems of like, well, you always pick restaurants that I can't afford. It's like, well, you never told me you could afford them. It's like, okay, let's be honest from the beginning.
Which is a great example. And for
Yeah.
context, for anyone who hasn't read the book is called Modern Friendship. And in general, what I would say it achieves is number one, demonstrating through your personal stories how disappointing it can be when modern friendship
Mm.
isn't working the way that we hope it will. And number two, what the impact of that confusion can be on you. And then number three, kind of some active steps people can take to audit their existing friendships, to build new friendships, and to really reframe in their mind how friendships evolve over time. You say the expectation that things will remain the same is the core enemy of modern friendship. I did your
Mm.
exercise yesterday. I thought, okay, let me try this. The next girlfriend that calls me, I'm going to think about our friendship and I'm going to tell her my hope for our friendship in this season is. So my friend called me and I said, listen, I just read this book. It's called Modern Friendship. And she makes the point that we can't have expectations that friendships stay the same way, but we also can't have expectations that we won't feel hurt or hurt the other person without
Mm,
communicating that it needs to change and that that might be temporary.
yeah.
So I said to her, in the context of that, I want you to know that I don't plan to let you go. And so we are both in this phase with small children, et cetera, et cetera. And I want you to know that it doesn't bother me if we see each other 20 times in 1 month and then once in the next month. That doesn't bother me at all for our friendship. But it really bothers me if once a month you don't make the effort to call me, at least it can be face to face or over the phone, and have a real download. Because if you don't care to do that, that means I feel like you just don't care. She was like, I feel the same way. I'm never letting you go either. And it was relieving. But then I called another friend afterwards. She said, I don't think we should have to work that hard at friendship.
But
What would you recommend anyone say to a friend who doesn't want to have that conversation?
that is an attitude that people hold. And even loved ones in my personal life, I have heard that exact sentiment to me
Right.
as I'm writing a book on friendship. But that's sending the message that, you know, I just think it's a outdated way of thinking, because then people look up one day and they're like, my friends aren't around.
Right.
I really think this is an issue of us not having appropriate models in TV, film, pop culture of what actual friendship looks like, modern adult friendship. The models that we have are unrealistic.
Mhm.
You know, they're for sitcoms. They're for where they practice friendship monogamy, like the Golden Girls, where it's like these are the same people, and we get into capers, and then at the end of the day, we have a cheesesteak. I mean, a cheesecake, not a. I'm in Philly; they do not have a cheesesteak, a cheesecake, and are like, okay, let's wrap it up. You know, we have so many nuanced depictions of of romantic relationships. You see the way that couples negotiate and talk, and you know what a breakup conversation sounds like. We can recite it each, you know, verbatim. It's not you, it's me. It's like,
A
you know, we have a
romantic breakup
yes,
conversation.
romantic breakups. Like there's so much, but with friends, it's a lot harder because friendships are so ambiguous. I mean, you have one romantic partner, unless, you know, for most people, but you have so many friends and you have different levels of intimacy with your friends. So it's just a really uncharted territory of how to repair interpersonal conflicts with friends.
We have
With
no
this,
examples. You make a really good point about that. Never or rarely
never,
do we see people negotiate platonic long-term friendships to keep them alive.
which which gives people the idea that it should take no effort,
Yeah, which is
because
just not true.
which is not true, and it it's not realistic when you have two very busy multidimensional people who love each other as friends, and they're trying to stay together and make their lives work so that they can keep their friendship alive. You know, in the 1950s, most women's friendships were very like lighthearted. They were usually if you're a woman, you had a choice of a few professions. You were usually married and had children. Like it was all pretty much the same. You probably all went to the same church or the same synagogue, very
You
much
live
like
not
you.
far from where you grew up as
Yes,
well.
you live exactly. Like it was just a very different expectation of your friendships
Mhm.
now. And I really go to a lot of length describing the sociology of today of we live more in a spoke network where we're in the middle and we have these branches of cohorts who
Mm,
only share common history with us, not with each other. And so the burden has shifted onto us individually to run our social lives. We have no help.
right.
So, you know, it's an outdated thought of like, well, our friendship should just run with no intervention and no discussion. It's like, well, that's not how our friendships work now. Our friendships work where we have to make the case to each other to keep the friendship going.
With no
We have,
community, with no village, and with
yes,
no
no,
connective tissue holding us together, and with our lives going in wildly different directions. So it's
yes.
no wonder. Is it true that we lose half our friendships every 7 years?
Yeah, that was from a 2014 study by Gerald Hurst. And when I first saw that stat, I was like, oh my God, we're like ogres just like cutting down our friendships. Like, you're out, you're out. But as I think more about that stat, I think it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful that we evolve and we seek out new people to meet the new interests, the new passions that we have. We have so many more things that we can be interested in compared to like our ancestors, our grandparents. There was no like internet. You know, if I'm really into turtles and I go on a turtle subreddit and I can meet people all over the world into turtles, it's like, well, I can't meet people in my little town who care this much about this thing that I care so much. So we've removed time and distance as a impediment when making friends, but that comes with the cost of, but then if you're not into turtles anymore, you're going to drop that whole circle of friends. It is changing a lot in interesting ways, but we don't have the cultural scripts to address it.
Right. I think you said it takes 200 hours to convert from an acquaintance to a friend.
Best friend.
So people to a best friend.
Yes. It doesn't have to be that long if it's just an acquaintance, but like
Okay.
stranger to best friend takes about 200 hours of shared time.
Which is fascinating because I've never heard it quantified before. The only
I
other
know.
hourly quantification I've heard is 10,000 hours of practice to
Right.
mastery, right? But if it takes 200 hours to convert from an acquaintance to a best friend,
Mhm.
I wonder how many hours it takes to convert from a first date to the love of your life. And if you put it in that
Hmm.
context, and maybe it's something like 200 focused hours, it becomes much more important to figure out if your values really align because it's an investment making a best friend.
Mhm.
I don't know anyone who has 200 hours to waste.
Well, you know, those hours were easier when we're younger and in school, and it really is about the desire for the friendship. What do you talk about? One The most exciting thing I learned in researching and writing this book was that every friendship needs an about, and the about needs to be clear and compelling to both people. I think people misunderstand that affection should be enough to keep a friendship active. But that's not what keeps a friendship active. What keeps us in touch, what keeps us gabbing a few times a week is, what is our about? What do we talk about? It's something apart from the friendship. And like I just said, I'm a writer, I'm a journalist, and I have really close friendships with other journalists. What do we talk about? Our industry. We talk about people we know. We talk about, have you read this book? Have you talked about, oh, this person got a book deal? Those things are very compelling to me. That's what drives friendships. And I think if people understood that, they'll understood why some friendships fade or cool is because, well, what's our about? And is it clear and compelling to both people?
Which is sort of similar to looking at marriage and saying, if your about originally was romantic entanglement and then your about became the children, then is it any
Yeah, it's,
wonder that when you're empty nested, you have to negotiate a whole new
yes.
marriage? People don't fight that idea. But
Mm,
you hit a certain point in middle age, I think, where it, for our generation, for our modern, privileged, fortunate lifestyle, for most people listening to this podcast, they may not be living close to where they grew up. They may be holding
mhm,
on to friends from college, friends from grad school, friends from the other city that they lived in, and trying to negotiate keeping in touch with people at the same time as they're trying to deepen roots where they've decided to live their middle age. And at the same
mhm,
time as they're really trying to figure out what to value. Do you value having a friend you can see once a year and put the effort into keeping that friendship up so you're going to want to see each other for that spa weekend? Or do you value putting extra time into getting to know those new ladies in town who you have that one thing in common with? So the question that comes to
Mm.
mind is, as we age, is it harder to negotiate old friendships or to build new ones?
It Studies say that it is harder to renegotiate friendships when you're older, but it's not impossible. And I just think we haven't had the models for it. And I've renegotiated my friendships certainly as we get older of like, I'm not into happy hours. What if we did a brunch, or what if we did a coffee, or what if we just did walks?
Mhm.
Um, we do that all the time. The first things you learn about friendship is it's a voluntary relationship. It's not like a parent or child or sibling. Um, you learn that friendships can end at any time for any reason. And sometimes your best friend loses their job. Sometimes and your best friend moves away. Like these are relationships, unlike a romantic relationship where you're in it. They're not they there are so
Right,
many things that your life is intertwined with this person in a way that it's not with a friend.
right.
So there are limitations to the friendship. It's like I was reading this chapter in a textbook about friendship by William Rollins, and he was saying family, friends, and neighbors, and how different is family. You know them your whole life, but they may not live near you. Neighbors, you know them usually for a short time and they live right in your face. And friends are the worst of both. You know them for a long time, but they're not in your face. So it's like friendships are, it's just a harder challenge of how do we
Yes.
keep these friendships going? Like when
Mhm.
you're a new parent,
Mhm.
you might find yourself pulling away from your friends without kids because it's more compelling. You Friends that have kids have way more information that's more compelling to you. Oh,
Right,
what daycare to use? Like, oh, which day do and which doctor?
right.
Um,
And there's a lot of
yeah,
judgment involved. And you say modern friendship is about the story we tell ourselves about why people respond the way that they do. I love that. Modern friendship is about the story
mm,
we tell ourselves about why people respond the way that they do.
yeah,
It makes it very clear to me that we're treating friendships like the guessing game, that it's very clear we don't make romantic relationships. We're all about communicate your
yeah,
needs, and we don't do that in our friendships because we're afraid to communicate because we don't want to leave, right? We don't want to leave our friendships. But sometimes those friendships do end, and sometimes it's not clear until it's over, and sometimes it's not clear why it happened. So then we find ourselves, and you talk about this in the book, we find ourselves mourning a friendship. And the
yeah,
mourning can come on slowly. We almost don't realize until she's gone, right? Until the friendship doesn't look like it used to. And we're hurt and we're angry, but how do you talk to
mm.
someone who's already left the room, right? How is mourning a platonic friendship different than mourning a romantic relationship?
Well, with the romantic relationship, I mean, like I said, we have so many scripts. I spent a lot of time in the book talking about vital roles, and that was developed by Tom Rath in his book, Vital Roles. And it's really about the role that this friend played for you. Like, I don't feel mourning and grieving over every single friend that
Mhm,
peels away. But the
mhm.
ones where I do mourn, it's because it seems like
Right.
the ones where I do feel this strong emotional reaction, it's usually because they played a really important role in my life. And I'm grieving having that role, losing that role that that friend played. And it could be, I worked very hard to become good friends with one of my ex-boyfriends.
Mm,
Um, we make great friends. We make better friends than
mhm,
romantic partners. But
mhm.
he would enter new romantic relationships and his new partner would be totally um,
Uncomfortable.
insecure about our friendship.
Mhm.
And I really was upset about it. But then I learned about these roles, and he was my mind opener. He's the one we talked about new directors and new bands, and he'd always introduce me to new things. And that's what was hard for me about losing that friendship with him was that the role he played. And then it helped me it's like now I understand what was happening. Um, studies show friendships that are a threat to romantic relationship are the first to go. So
Right.
clearly I was on the chopping block, but my outsized sadness was because of the role he played for me.
But when you talk about the pain of mourning, this is important. The pain of mourning a platonic
Hmm.
relationship can come as much from the loss of the role that that friendship played in your life as it can from the ambiguous nature of why the relationship ended. And I think that's a big part of the problem. People don't even
Yeah.
convey that, hey, I'm gonna pull back. They just pull back.
Yeah.
And when people do that, how should someone respond?
Well, that's information, and you have to respect their decision. And you also have to raise your standards of I need friends that can communicate with me. I need friends that can be available. I mean, I've let friendships go on way longer than they should have because of what that friendship represented to me. It represented a time in my life. Like this woman's known me since I was, you know, eating Teddy Grahams.
You
Yeah.
said to ask ourselves, given what we know about people now, would we select them as a friend?
Yeah.
What is
And
your
sometimes
guess?
you're like,
What is your guess? How often would people reselect the friends they already have?
it depends what your friendship's about. It depends on the quality of the friend. Do they do unsolicited advice? Are they always complaining and venting to you without
Yeah.
asking for consent? Like all these little things that you're like, I don't really, when you feel drained after talking to this friend, when you feel depleted, it's like, I don't think I would choose this person today. It's more just a relic. It's, something I've had for so long. It almost feels like family.
There's also a piece where we feel what's implicit in platonic relationships is reciprocity. So when someone starts to go down a rabbit hole, you think to yourself, well, they would be there for me. They would be there for me. So I should be there for them, even if it drains me, right? But I think it's
Mhm.
another example of how we erode that interpersonal trust because we're lying by saying we're okay with you complaining
Yeah.
for 4 straight years. We're lying.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yes.
it's not okay for 4 years. But we're afraid maybe you're too fragile. We're afraid maybe the friendship will fall apart if we say, honey, this energy is starting to affect me.
Yes.
Why is interpersonal trust on the decline?
Oh my gosh. Well, our trust in our institutions has plummeted steadily since the 1970s. There's no communal good trust.
Hmm.
Um, Individualism is rampant in our culture. We want freedom. We want freedom, but we want freedom to not do things. We want freedom to not have friends. We want freedom to step away from people. It's
Right.
not freedom to meet with whoever we want. It's freedom to be like, I've had enough. I'm going home. That's the freedom
Right.
of our culture. Individualism has really shifted our culture in
Around
all sorts of ways.
friends. Hmm.
Um, Even just a few generations ago, like friendships were seen for favors. Hey guys, I need to build a deck. Will you come over and help? I'll have a beer. Hey friends, help me move. I'll get some pizzas. Now it'd be the more wealth you have, the more gauche it seems to have your friends and loved ones help you with things. You hire movers, you hire people to build your deck.
So then
You're
how
not
do you
going
build a feeling of community?
exactly. And even our, suburbs, like when you have more wealth, you have more privacy. And James Richardson just wrote a great book called Our Worst Strength about individualism in America that covers all of these trends and really helped open my eyes to, yeah, like we don't have a culture that sets us up for success in our friendships. We want more privacy. We want more land separating us between our neighbors.
Right.
If you're lower class, you tend to rely on your friends and neighbors so much more to get along with your life. But when you're wealthier, you just outsource all of it. You hire the Uber to take you to the airport. You're not relying on
That's,
your friend.
it's really interesting because it would seem obvious to me that everyone would agree with the statement functional friendships are reciprocal, but we don't behave that way.
Well, now it's more emotional support. in a way that it wasn't for previous generations. Like women in their 50s did not share, I think I'm having a miscarriage, like things are like there was a veneer there. You didn't share that with your girlfriends. Yeah, well now we have a confessional culture where it's like, oh my god, my period hurts so much right now, that we expect our friends to be a therapist, a mother, a sister, all in one.
Oh, tough love, life coach. Yeah. Mhm.
Yes, life coach, like,
Cheerleader. Why is being a best friend more valuable than having one?
oh my god, I love this question. This was a study done by Suzanne Degas White, who's done incredible research on friendships. And she found in a study of happiness in midlife women that people think having more friends will feel really good, but our phones are full of friends and we never call them. What actually feels good is being considered someone's best friend, because that's a great measure of your inner beauty, your good character, and your integrity. To have someone choose you, to identify you, to point at you and say, that's my best friend. That feels really good. It just feels so good to be like, you are my best friend. And a lot of times we don't say that as adults. I mean, it feels very juvenile, of like a necklace, but it's giving your friend permission to invest in the friendship. And uncertainty creates anxiety. So much of our adult friendships are uncertain. Where do I stand? We were best friends 5 years ago. Are we still best friends today? I don't know. And it that can get in your head. It might prevent you from reaching out. It might prevent you from knowing how to act in like a big event of like, well, I don't know if it's appropriate for me to go to her father's funeral. I don't know if it's appropriate. My goal is for people to get this information now so they don't have to second guess. And it's just a gift you give yourself to not have this uncertainty and this ambiguity.
So if you can't say it to your friends, then maybe they're not really a safe place the way you thought they were. I'm not going to say they're not your friend, right? But there's
Well,
an audit there.
I think I think it's something we can do for our friends is model. I've been modeling, like, this is how I practice friendship. One
Mm.
of the things I did was like, can I vent to you for 5 minutes? I ask for permission I want to vent about, my editor for 5 minutes. Do you have time? It's not urgent. When you consider the recipient of your message, I think a big problem is people don't spend enough time considering how their messages land. They're like,
Mm.
hey, thinking of you, let's get together. And to the recipient, it's like, was this homework? Like, those are things we do all the time, these low lift messages of thinking of you, we should get together soon. It's like, okay, well, why? Why? You've been thinking about
So,
me? Why
okay.
is that my problem that I have to like figure out a
One
time to meet?
one thing we clarified on this podcast today, if nothing else, is that hey, thinking of you, let's get together soon is the friendship equivalent of the midnight text
You up?
WYD.
Yeah, what you do? Hey, it's like the hey with two Y's.
Like
Hey,
you don't love me. You don't.
like that's how the message could be received, even though the
And
intention wasn't here,
isn't
figure it out. Like, I want to
yeah.
see you. You figure out when we can do it.
Rather than saying to someone, I miss you, let's get together soon, say to them, I want to see you. How about I come over next week with Chinese food if you want, or if you have a free night, let's go for dinner.
I spend a lot of time talking about choice theory in the book, which was developed by Dr. William Glasser in the 1960s. And he talks about how we have 5 basic genetic needs. All of us do, they're inherent. And they're survival, power, love and belonging, freedom, and fun. When you think about modern friendships, it's like, well, who can I do this stuff with? Who can I contribute to their life with realistically? And just pick a few people and then lean into those areas. And, you know, it's it's not an unknowable. I feel like when I first reported on friendships, my friendships felt like wild stallions pulling me in all sorts of directions. But now it's like I've learned how to write the music of friendship. These are the notes. These are the ways to create beautiful music. So we can learn about how people work, and we can meet them where they're at and make it easy to be friends with us and to care about them in ways that move the needle.
One can only hope.
one can hope, but you're setting yourself up for success because our culture's not doing it for us.
Thank you for making the time today.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I could talk to you all day.